Ourselves. I am Roberto Capodieci, as you can see.
And I am Mr. Barton Johnston, as you can see on the screen right now.
And yeah, there we are. That's the best configuration. We are expert in setting up cameras and all in the shortest time every time. It's incredible. So one day we're gonna have a fixed studio that never changes, set up properly. One day.
So, today we thought we would talk about a topic that's very close to our hearts as people who work in blockchain a lot of the time. And it's not only related to blockchain, in fact, it has a lot of other cool uses, and we hope to see a lot more of it in the future. And this is peer-to-peer networking. So, what does it mean for something to be peer-to-peer? It's kind of a buzzword now. And I don't know, maybe I start by giving the simplest example. We don't have a whiteboard yet, so I can't draw anything, can I? No. So I just do it with my fingers. So usually, if I want to send a signal from one computer to the other, this is going to go through a central point, which could be kind of abstract. It could be like an internet, a cloud of computers that I don't really understand. But at the very least, it's going to go through, I guess even peer-to-peer, it's going to go through an ISP, it's going to go through some levels like this. But typically, if we're talking about a web service, let's imagine like a website, like your online banking portal that you log in, or Facebook or something like this. They have one computer or group of computers in the middle that they control, and every single person who wants to use the service from their own personal computers that are all over the world, all of them are going to send a message to this central thing and come back. This guy sends here and he gets a response back. This guy sends here and he sends a response back from this central set of computers in the middle. So the diagram makes a kind of a star, right? So how is peer-to-peer different than this?
Well, peer-to-peer is fascinating because the difference between peer-to-peer and other network structure is the fact that there is no one point of failure, like one central point of disruption, right? Even in stellar network where things expand, one central node send to seven, those tend to hold. As you kill one, you kill down forward that cascade of data transmission. A ring network, you can break apart. Peer-to-peer network, any node can connect to any other node. So until the nodes can see some other nodes, at least they can propagate to potentially the rest of the nodes, whatever message intends to propagate. That's as if coming to an analogy with people living in several villages. They have a messenger. They go from a village to another to bring information. That's a kind of network where if you kill the messenger, the message doesn't propagate to the next village. While in a place where everybody travel from a village and another and meet people on the road, and whoever they meet, they send a message, there is higher probability that the message goes around.
There's promise in this analogy, and I try to modify it a little bit.
Sure, because it just came out like this now.
So imagine that you have a place where you have a big city in the country, right? And all of around this big city are lots of other little villages and townships and things like this. Now imagine the way the internet works with major, say like messaging services and most online applications, is that if I want to send a package from one village to another village, this package has to go through the big city and get routed to that other village. And if that village wants to send the package back, then it has to get routed through the big city and come back to my little village. All of the routing is in this big city. Now, if the big city is having riots, or if the big city is having some kind of failure of this central infrastructure for how to ship packages, all of the villages have lost the ability to send information and things back and forth between each other. But if each of the villages takes upon itself to have a little bit of the infrastructure that it needs to send a guy or some packages to another village and come back, first of all, the trip is shorter, because maybe he can go straight there. Occasionally, I move this way, occasionally, if the city's in the middle, one village is here and the other village is up here, and it takes about as much time to go between both. But I'm really messed up looking at myself mute. But many times it's even faster and cheaper to go directly between the two villages and not ever touch the big central city. And you remove a kind of independence as well.
Well, not only this makes route shorter sometimes, but it makes a central place less busy. Because if there is a single big city that has to handle all the packages that go from any village to any other village, you need a very big infrastructure there. If every village only manages the package from and to their own village to some other, and they have people going around, they have less need of an infrastructure and quantity of data because they distribute the work among. Obviously, the total amount of people within all the villages is going to be more than the one that is in the central city, but the advantages on the other hand are that even if one village suddenly their office goes in fire or whatever, they can always rely in the other villages to go collect package and distribute and bring them somewhere else.
So this is exactly the kind of benefit that we get from peer-to-peer networking. There's a lot of arguments to be made from it, but there's also things that it makes more difficult. And so going back to this same analogy about all the villages around the big city, there's a reason that the people in the big city might want all of the packages to come through the big city. For example, maybe they want to give a quality control because they need the shipping to go a certain way. Certainly they want to collect information. They want to know who's sending a package to who and at what time, and they want to keep a record of this in case that information needs to go to law enforcement, in case it needs to go. They need to understand which of the villages need more supplies on average so that they can choose, how to shape the laws, and they can choose. There's many reasons that they want to keep this information in one place. But where peer-to-peer comes in is that
mostly because if the major of the central city have a fight with the major of one village, can cut off the village from sending and receiving packets from anybody,
absolutely.
Right?
The interests of this central planning body that orchestrates everything may not be the same interests as the individual villages that need the services provided by the city. And that's why we choose this model. We're interested in this model in computer systems because in many cases the same. Say we take a nameless social network invented by
a nameless guy,
this network has in its interest that it wants to collect every piece of data about every person's life that reports through it, and would very much love if they could force it to happen that people don't even have the power to communicate with each other off of its platform, so it collects every little drip of data which it's able to monetize one way or other. It loves the ability that when somebody acts or speaks in a way that it doesn't like, that it can completely exclude them from the network. And the fact that as more and more people depend on their central place on the internet to move this stuff for their daily life, that power to cut somebody out of that space is an increasing power over the lives of those people, and they like to accumulate this power. Their interests do not align with the individual people who really want to use the service to communicate with each other, to share about their lives with each other, who, if such an infrastructure existed and were as easy as the central one, might be better off to send data directly between each other's computers and never touch this big central cluster in the middle.
But you think it's only a matter of interest in controlling information that things have developed in a way where the central part was just a matter of evolution? I think the idea that ARPANET implemented the internet with the protocol of TCP/IP, right? To always have a matter of connection, a routing of connection between 2 points, even if the direct connection between those 2 points got broken, right? It was a military need in order to have a network
redundancy or robustness.
I can route through any route, and I can always go from A to B, even if the direct connection doesn't work. But in general, how computer came out, I think that we are dragging ahead the expense of computer power that was super expensive in the past. So it was easier to have a central computer power and many terminals that send and read information from this computer. IBM mainframe, the S400, S36 were very expensive computer that nowadays will be a laugh because an iPhone is more powerful. But at the time, those were important. So putting one of these to every desk of every people was something that you cannot even consider, right? So you had this central computer where data is stored, where the computation of data is done, where query and database are made. And every person can have a terminal, which was a really cool stupid terminal, means only managed to display character they receive through a connection and send out a character from this connection. It's like if a single computer had many keyboards and many monitors, pretty much. And offering to every monitor and every listening every keyboard and offering output to every monitor based on what was asked. I think this shaped the mentality that data computation should be centralized and the display, even in how the first browser came out, right? The first browser were not meant to elaborate data locally. They were only meant to display data in a nice way that was elaborated centrally, right? The same way the mail server, you write your email or read your email in the mail client, but it's the mail server that manages all the storage and all the sending and receiving.
You make a very important point that I skipped over completely because suddenly I made centralization sound very sinister. But you're correct that I don't think that's the reason things evolved that way. It was an influence, but that's not the primary reason. The primary reason was for efficiency, because you don't have to duplicate the infrastructure everywhere. Because, if the thing is on fire, if it's broken, there's one place you have to fix it, not everywhere. Because if a company offers a service and they need to make sure the service is up and running, they have control over the assets to make sure that happens. They don't have to go to every person's house.
Right.
And because you get an economy of scale, because it's cheaper to buy 1,000 computers, per unit, it's cheaper to buy 1,000 computers than it is to buy 10 computers. And so, when they place orders in bulk, when they run things in data center, when they share the costs across all these things that individual people would have to duplicate, it becomes cheaper overall. And so these are the reasons I think that things evolve in a centralized direction, because reducing the redundancy in the resources needed actually makes it more feasible to implement it first. But now we're starting to enter a condition, like Roberto mentions, that the redundancy of resources is starting to be there de facto. The computers sitting on people's desktops or their laptops now are computers that are 10,000 times more powerful than a few decades ago when they started to build this infrastructure.
And Barton check is exactly 10,000, not 10,001 or 9,999. Is exactly the computer in your desk. So the one
only 10% of statistics are made up on this class. So,
but yes,
it's a large fold more powerful than you had in the past. And so, in the past, like we said, it was ridiculous to believe that individual people would have the computing power, even added between all of them, to run the whole service. But now it's not so difficult to imagine. When you're talking about things like sending messages, a computer can process, save, and redistribute a message in a couple of milliseconds, And so it's not difficult to imagine, say, a messaging protocol which goes peer-to-peer between people's individual computers.
And I will tell you more. Not only the shift of this centralization is due to an evolution on the computer part, because while the growth of speed in data processing is not directly proportional in the growth of speed of data transmission. Data transmission grew, but not as fast as data processing. So it became cheaper and cheaper to process the data locally than centrally. There are only particular situations when it's cheaper to process data remotely, because there are particular things like new kind of processing that require a particular hardware that only few people have. We can think about neural network or machine learning process. In the case, for example, when you talk to your phone, the analysis of what you said is not on your phone. It's the audio is sent remotely to a server that has a huge power that can provide very fast an analysis of your voice, translating it into text and a command. Maybe in a few years it's gonna be more economical to process the analysis locally in the phone because there is a chip that has this capacity already preset, rather than sending and receiving back, making the phone autonomous even without a connection to write what you dictate. But on the other side, it's also true that there is an interest that is not directly connected to economy of data processing in collecting.
Probably, when the audio is processed even on your phone, they're still going to send the processed result back to the central server because they want to know the statistics of what people have said.
To send the advertisement relating to the etc. etc. But still, it is...
Yeah, and in fact, this kind of thing changes the economics a lot. So one of the very easy methods, say for example, imagine how expensive it would be to run Facebook, the company, you know? So we're talking about tens of thousands of computers and server racks all over the world that are organized, and thousands and thousands of people. There's people who review comments, and there's people who do, you know, like any kind of job you can imagine related to that company. And on top of that, you know, the value on the stock market is ridiculous. So, but not a single person pays to use Facebook. You never put your credit card, anybody who wants to create an account, even if you want to create 10, is against the rules, but try it, you can. They'll take anything. And the reason is because the data itself is profitable to sell to people who want to know how people behave. You know, advertisers are willing to pay to know how many people talk about wanting this thing in their life, or how many people are speaking positively or negatively about their product, or what are the statistics on how many people. There's any number of things that somebody who wants to sell a product or a service out there is willing to pay Facebook to learn from this giant mass of data that they've collected about people. And they do sell it that way, and that's how they pay for the entire service. And in that way, every single person who winds up on the platform is actually generating money for them. You don't pay for it directly. No. You pay for it by exposing the real details of your life.
This is a very common point of discussion.
And not to say positive or negative.
There is no obligation to use Facebook. Nobody is pointing a gun on your head that you have to use it. You're having a good experience by using Facebook, you're paying nothing, they expose advertisement to you, that's the deal. Even many television stations, you don't pay to see them, but they use a sponsor and advertisement in order to...
Somebody put a gun to my head in so many words. I didn't want a Facebook account. My mother and my girlfriend at the time made one for me and then forced me to get on it.
Well, the thing I think
so there's a strong network effect.
Now, we are going a little bit out of the subject of peer-to-peer with this, but in terms of data collection, something that scares me about the mix of technology that are used when collecting and analyzing data is that you may not have a Facebook account and at the same time being totally tracked down, because by biometrics, every time you appear in a picture posted by somebody else, you are located with the geolocation data inside the photo. People that is also biometrically identified next to you, so knows who you have been with, etc., etc. While they were experimenting and yet not regulated in this aspect, I had quite a shocking experience. I went to an amusement park where there was a show about stuntmen. So there was a public of more than 1,000 people sitting, and I stepped with a shoulder toward the show to take a picture of my two kids that were there. And this picture with a grand angle took pretty much all the audience. I posted this in Facebook, and suddenly Facebook asked me to tag hundreds of people that was recognizing into the public because a high resolution picture just by the biometric in the face, and people that were not connected to me. And
but now in the database you're connected to them.
But now they limit to people that practically are connected to you, but many times you have the suggestion, do you want to tag this person? And they said, how do you know that this person is there, right? Because biometrics. So we are a source of information even when we are not actively providing information. And strangely, if somebody accepts term and condition, is in a way accepting them in our behalf. Because if using installing an application, I accept term and condition that the microphone can listen to my voice to understand what I want, etc., because they put it there.
Well, I don't accept the condition.
But my phone is next to Barton talking. At this point, the application is also
me, and I have not approved to be recorded.
Correct. And same goes for appearing in a picture in Facebook or a video, because people is tagged also in videos where the biometric is done. And the funny and strange thing is that if I say I don't want to be recognized and don't want biometric done about me, in order to pretend this, I need to release my biometric, because how would they know that they should not archive my data if they cannot make a match with me, right? So, by definition, it's impossible to exclude oneself to this sort of things, simply because it's crazy. In fact, there is, sorry, I go out, but this is funny. Here in Indonesia, many franchise, I can even say the name, Dunkin' Donuts, for example, they leave the shops in the hand of some employees. Most employees, when you order your tray of donuts, and as you can see, I am an expert in the subject.
I'm a novice.
When you go to pay, they take a calculator, they write the total amount to be paid in the calculator, they show you the total in the calculator, they take the cash, and the franchisor that own the shop will never see the money. Then the manager declared that the donuts fell on the ground, are dirty, and throw them away, and they stole money. To avoid this, and this is the hilarious part, every shop has a sign that says, if you're not given a receipt, your meal is for free. But now, if I'm paying and they don't give me a receipt, I already paid, so the money are gone, how can I have the free meal, right? If I don't pay, they want me to pay, so it's impossible to apply this thing. And I photographed and I illustrated the whole process, everything in Dunkin' Donuts, and wrote to Dunkin' Donuts saying, guys, how do you apply this thing? It's a joke that you say I have a free meal. They don't give me a receipt, but the money are gone. I asked them, give me the money back, and they print the receipt immediately, right? So how do you apply that? They didn't reply to me. So I went to Dunkin' Donuts, and I said, I want to pay. They showed me the calculator. I said, well, I want to pay, and nothing. And then I walk out of the shop, and they say, you have to pay. I said, you don't give me receipt. And they immediately made the receipt. They said, but now it's too late. But it's a receipt that you don't pay. How you do that, right? So how you can tell somebody, don't feel my face, if in order to see if they're filming your face, they need to have a video or a picture of your face in the first place, right? So that's a little bit interesting aspect.
No, in fact, it's very interesting and it's related. But I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier, because in fact, you're correct. As interesting as this topic is of data collection and people consenting and how companies profit from it, blah, 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 really, I want to use that as a motivation to imagine a different kind of future. So we started with this example of like Facebook, for example, and the way they collect all this because it goes through the center. And even we saw how in the beginning this was because there's an economy of scale. They needed it to be like this. But let's imagine the different kind of motivations and contracts if your social network was purely a peer-to-peer system. So, for example, in this case, still I can use the system for free, but the contract that I make when I install the software on my computer is that because by me being allowed to use the software and see my friends and talk to my friends, also I allow the extra resources of my computer to be used, both the connections and the processing and storage and whatever else, to pass encrypted messages back and forth between other computers that are not related to me. And as long as I agree to let that extra processing power, which in most cases I'm not using anyway most of the day, I'm sitting there browsing Facebook. And so in this case, we imagine differently. So in the centralized model, if I want to send a picture to my friend, I take the picture on my phone. which way am I doing? Okay, here's my phone. I take the picture on my phone. It's uploaded to the cloud here, to Facebook's servers. Facebook stores the servers for me, and then Facebook sends the picture to my friend's phone, right? And then he looks at the picture that I took. In this case, maybe phones are a bad example, phones can be notes, but I say phone to phone. It doesn't matter. A phone is a computer these days. We're talking about my picture. When I create it, it goes directly through the internet to my friend's phone. Now, if that friend shares the picture with his friends, then maybe he sends it directly to their phones over the network. And always, it's possible, just like it is on Facebook, that one of these people copies the thing and they go and share it all over the internet. And I've lost the privacy of this data.
Once it's there,
there's nothing you can do. But in the majority case, for the small time kind of messages, normal day-to-day interaction that nobody cares to blast all over the entire internet, we really have the security that there is no central point for somebody to wait and collect all the information about my life. There's no central point. In fact, there doesn't need to be, because the cost, the burden of running this network is handled by all of the people around the world who run the computers.
Let me recap a little bit what you say, because this sounds interesting. So, Facebook makes money, is centralized, collect your information, makes money by using your information and returning you the advertisement, etc., etc. And in this way, it can finance all the server that is maintaining and offer the service for free.
They should pay me at this point.
Doesn't matter. This is a point of view. But in practical terms, let's say they have a business. The business model is to show you advertisement, collecting money from the advertisers and give you a free service. And to give this service, they have a lot of expenses, which is a lot of personnel, a lot of servers around. Okay.
Yeah.
If we decentralize Facebook, so from some data center full of computer, we distribute to everybody's computer, we can say this: you have to pay to use this service. At this point there is no revenue, but how is this system paid? By offering resources of your computer to be part of this network computer, so you can even become more powerful than Facebook itself, because maybe by all the computer, all the participants.
This is true.
And we can say this: you offer your computer service, you earn as is used, but to use Facebook, you need to spend what you earned. Okay, so if you have money, you don't need to run a server, you can pay for the use. If you have a computer live there, you can earn and resell the things, and you create an economy by using this decentralized network.
As long as your computer services as many other users post as the post that you want to make, then you pay the balance transparently.
Second point. The content is only distributed along those that need to see or want to see the content, and not to a central place where everything is kept. So this also means less exposure of things that doesn't need to be exposed to people that doesn't need to see. There is an interesting point that is because there is no central moderation, people start posting horrible content. And how can I defend myself from being exposed by this thing? But the decentralization means also that I can choose whose content I see. So if my brother is attached and is posted, I can block my brother at that point.
Let's talk a little bit more in detail about that.
Because one thing is important, I do believe, and is that Facebook has a central point of censorship, moderation, which sometimes makes sense, other time not. There is a lot of discussion. And lately there has been a situation where the President of the United States moved an observation that in my opinion is very true, which means that the responsibility of what you say belongs to you in the moment that nobody modify, block or censor what you say. In the moment that somebody takes responsibility to reprint what you say, it means go through their moderation approval, they become responsible of what they publish. So a system like Facebook can either be a place where they re-propose, let's say I write a very nasty email to somebody else, the mail server is not responsible because they don't censor my emails. But in the moment that they do, they become responsible what goes through that.
This part is so important that I want to explain it again.
Please.
So this executive order that's just been issued in the United States, we both think is extremely important because it draws this distinction, which is these internet service companies that allow people to talk to each other, like Facebook, are considered platforms, and as platforms instead of a publisher or an editor. So if I were a publisher and I ran a news website that decides what to type and decides what to show the readers, then now I'm responsible for the stuff that I publish on my website. If I defame someone, if I post illegal content, anything like that, the law enforcement comes to me. The court cases come to me. But in the early years of defining the internet, when we started to have forums and we started to have other ways for people to communicate, the laws were made intelligently enough to recognize that sometimes an online service is not a publisher of every word that appears on its website. It's a platform for other people to freely interact with each other. And the person who operates this website is not responsible for the words that each person says to another person.
To give a small example, if I pick up the phone and I call Barton and I tell Barton you're ugly, is my responsibility, not the phone company responsibility, because they convey the message. They have no means to, in theory,
to intercept or to prevent the message.
Okay, so the point is this, the same with publication. If I write a letter to a newspaper that says Barton is ugly, I don't know why, and the newspaper published the letter, they can say that's opinion of Roberto, but they decided to publish the letter they shouldn't have published, so they are responsible, at least co-responsible with me. If I print a flyer and I put it around the city, I am the only responsible person, because I published this without the need of anybody consent or approval.
The company who makes the printer is not responsible.
Exactly.
Correct. So we have this distinction between what makes you a platform on which, or a tool or a service that people use to communicate with each other, and those people who communicate are the responsible parties, or you are the one who chooses what to publish and you're responsible for what you publish. So the argument goes like this. In the moment that a social network, which is ostensibly a platform, has control over the order of the content that people see on the site, and they use algorithms that nobody knows to decide the order of the content that people see. They have the power to block or censor any speech that goes on the website, oftentimes inconsistent with their own stated terms and conditions and with no explanation given. They have the power to add commentary, or these things called fact checks or related articles or things like this, where they deem it's appropriate. And they have all these powers to control what somebody actually sees when they go to the website. At this point, or let's say, at what point does that constitute editorial control? In the sense that if Facebook has the power to block one message that they say somebody said something bad and it's their responsibility to block that message, in principle, that means that every other message that hasn't been blocked by the platform
was approved,
one that they reviewed and one that they approved as speech on the platform. And in the moment they have the resources to approve every message that goes out and that they show to people, they're responsible.
But normally, in the moment that I cannot control what I see in my timeline, but they choose what I see in my timeline,
Correct.
Surely they're responsible about what I see in my timeline. If I don't see that was my friend's birthday because they don't publish in my timeline, and I don't say happy birthday to my friend, I blame Facebook, right? Yes. At a certain point, because I expected to see it between the newsfeed, because it's a newsfeed I consider. And if I had a way to set what I can see, I would have set it to see. So
the end of this brilliant argument goes like this. Because ostensibly a platform like this has such a wide degree of editorial control, which was never intended to be protected from responsibility by this little clause that says, if you can't check every comment, like maybe those people have their own freedom of speech on the platform. In the moment they've proven that really they can review everything, censor everything, even if it's with the help of algorithms, and they decide what you're going to see, they are the publishers, they are the editors, and they bear legal responsibility for what winds up on the platform. Now, this forces a social network into one of two options that they can do. One, the option that they don't want, is they can accept this status and say, yes, I'm a publisher, yes, I'm the editor of everything that goes on this website. In which case, they're immediately bombarded into oblivion by 10,000 lawsuits from people who said, little user X defamed me, and now I'm going to sue you for publishing his defamation of me. Choosing that option effectively obliterates them as viable companies. Now, the second option that they can choose is to be more conservative about which pieces of speech they block, more conservative about how they reorder the posts, and so they really honestly fit into the definition of a platform that people use to communicate with each other.
But at this point, they should not censor anything, which means...
In fact, the law gives the section of the law that they're abusing is one that gives a special permission that they say, so despite this platform protection, there's certain kinds of things that you're allowed to block people saying. So like if it's especially violent, if it's pornographic, they give a couple of examples of things that are clearly abusive, and they say you can remove these things from the site as long as they fit within this tight category and as long as it's clearly in the public good that they're removed. And so the argument here is that social networks have now abused this tiny little clause, this tiny little part of the law that protects them to delete the most obscene speech, to do censorship of political opinions, to do censorship of political authors, like people who are important, who aren't violating any of the terms that could be related to this law.
So they're going to block in YouTube this video because...
They can. They can, under the current interpretation of the law. They could say that we... have an opinion, whatever it is, but, in theory, there's still a platform, even though they choose to prevent us from saying these things.
So they say the ugly one is Roberto in truth. There was fake news containing this video.
And I put a little banner under the thing.
And they will censor us. Okay. So and now let's think that Facebook gets decentralized at a certain point, okay? Which means that there is no more central body, central control, and as any other blockchain or peer-to-peer system, once it's set in motion, nobody has a power to change things, right? So we will have this thing that we open this special browser that doesn't go in the internet, but goes in the peer-to-peer network, and start collecting information from different nodes based on where I need to see information, which probably is encrypted, but I have the keys to the crypt because this is my friend, so he shares the decryption key with me. And I start looking at a timeline of content that I choose to, and I'm being authorized to see, right? I can see messages that are going to be encrypted with the same keys, for example, and at this point, I see something I don't like. So I want to block somebody that is stalking me or something like this. I can do it, and when my special browser connects, it's gonna stop from. So it changed my encryption key, let's say, and then distribute it only to the people that I.
If I block someone on Facebook right now, I send a message to Facebook servers that says, "Hey, this guy, don't send me any messages from this guy. Don't show me any posts from this guy." And when I try to get on the camera, and when Facebook actually sends me the news feed, it sends me the content on their central server side, they filter out the stuff that comes from this guy. So the change that we're talking about in the peer-to-peer network sense is that now it's only a setting inside my browser, inside my computer. So the social network, if that guy wants to send me a message, still he can send data across the network to send me a message, but my device is not going to show it to me because I've chose to block that guy. And it doesn't need a central party to manage the censorship. I can set up what I want to be censored for me directly.
You can put keywords that if they're contained, you're no.
You don't have to put, And there's a lot that you can do with this.
And it doesn't have issue with long video streaming and things as they're going to be distributed as is needed, I guess.
Correct. This is a service that's provided by the different nodes. So video streaming is going to send packets through a lot of different nodes on the network. Now,
it's like when we started watching a movie that we're downloading, we never did, but I heard my cousin saying that.
I also have friends of friends who had illegally downloaded a movie once.
Bad people.
So, we run into it, but I want to go back and address one more thing on this that we got to before we talked about the cool new EO from the United States, which is there's another reason that a company might want to centrally control all the information that passes through it, which you hinted at. And we talked about some. There's two sides to it. One is that the law enforcement might want access to all the data that goes through to conduct legitimate criminal investigations. So if someone is sending child pornography, if somebody is sending, like trading in illegal drugs or weapons or human trafficking or any of these kind of things, law enforcement might want to have access to the communications between these people in order to prove that they're committing crimes and actually prevent the crimes from happening. And depending on how much you trust at the law enforcement agency, any given agent on any given day, this is a positive public service that they're able to perform by access to this information. In many cases, we know from Edward Snowden, they have demanded and forced the back doors to be opened in many of these big companies to let them in for whatever reason they deem fit. But the other reason is, even if the law enforcement weren't involved, this gives the publisher, if they choose to act in good faith, the opportunity, I called them a publisher already, this gives the central company, if they act in good faith, the opportunity to prevent this content or report it correctly or any other thing like this. So this is one of the things that when we move from a centralized company that can really be a legally responsible party in this case, and instead we split it into a decentralized network that runs on 10,000 computers around the world, or say 1 million computers or 1 billion computers if you're the size of Facebook, then at that moment there becomes no economical method to go and notice every piece of illegal speech, to notice every piece of people using the platform for drugs and crime. It's impossible.
So they're going to make it illegal. I wonder if the evolution of information technology wasn't going through a centralized distribution to a lot of stupid terminals, but was actually distributing from the beginning. It couldn't have done, but if it was like this and the world evolved in that way, where mesh network are the only connectivity mechanics that there are, and there are only long bridge that are offered by
We didn't even touch on mesh networks. That's for another video.
Oh my god, that's so important. I wonder if there will be there will be complaints about the decentralization means to control or monitor or censor, and people will call for a centralized solution to...
I think in many cases they would. I think, and this is a little bit in the condition we're in right now. So in one way, we're finally approaching having the capacity to run to totally decentralized services this way, which didn't exist before. But that was never the only reason that they were centralized. And I think a lot of people say we see this with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency right now. This exact same argument applies that we're talking about in the social network sense, which is that on one hand, all of your money moving through this network of banks, who are these gigantic legally responsible parties in theory, means that the government, the law enforcement, the banks themselves can enforce that people are following the laws, they're following the rules, they're treating each other honestly and things like this. Whereas if you really had, which you now do, a global network where people can anonymously, quietly, individually trade currency to each other for any reason that they want, and there's no way for anybody to step in and block it, and there's no way for anybody to see all of it, then they can do with it whatever they want. And it's kind of a wild, wild west. It's the ultimate, it's a forced laissez-faire government. There's the people themselves take the power away from the central authority. And in so many words, it's anarchistic, They call themselves crypto-anarchists, right? The very original Bitcoin people, that was the whole idea, is that it's better that we decide amongst each other what we're allowed to do than that we allow some central party, which may or may not be corrupt or moronic or whatever else, to decide what we're allowed to do.
Are people so intelligent and ready and equilibrated to do this, or people need guidance? Anyway, even in the decentralized mechanics of a social network, there will be somebody producing the box that people need to keep at home. There will be somebody creating the standard for which you connect to it. There will be,
You still have the capacity for what we learned about a few videos back, if you were paying attention, that we called a common mode failure, which is that even if there's 1,000 computers around the network, that are run by individual people and have never touched each other, in the moment that all those computers were produced by the same person in the same factory that installed the same basic software, then that becomes the central point from which you put the little bug that listens into what everybody's saying and reports back to the central server.
So on this basis, the most difficult aspect of decentralization of peer-to-peer is that the technology has to grow in a decentralized manner, right? So it has to be really open source, really contributed by many, really approved by many, hoping that these many have in effect the capacity to correctly implement and approve the right thing. And they're not being corrupted by a central party that wants to corrupt many in order to achieve. I mean, for example, in Linux itself, there has been cases that have been found out that the developers team been forcefully put backdoors and things in the code, which resisted for a while, then they've been found out and discovered. And seems that some government entity was behind pushing them or forcing them.
It's so important to note. This is one of the things I think Edward Snowden gave us the greatest gift that any democracy-loving person could give, which is he spilled the beans on all of the kind of data collection that the United States government is doing, which is not just relevant to people in the United States. They vacuum up everything. Like most of the major internet service providers things are hosted in the United States, like 80 or 90% of them, because that's where a lot of the development of the internet infrastructure happened. And so anything that passes through the United States, they have access to, which turns out is almost everything. So really...
To make it clear, even emails sent between Syria and Afghanistan most probably goes through the United States.
And so this, really, this thing that nobody understood, in fact, people who claimed this before were ridiculed as conspiracy theorists for suggesting that the government was secretly collecting all the data.
I would never do that.
No, we saw directly that Apple, the CIA or NSA, I guess, the NSA approached Apple and they said, we need you to build this backdoor to let us search through all your user records. And Apple said, okay, and they never publicized it. They approached Google and they said, hey, we need you to build this secret backdoor for us, and Google's engineers went and did it, and they never told anybody. They approached
It's not
Microsoft.
because they accomplished it, but because if they don't, they get sued, they get in big trouble, and they cannot even complain publicly about it.
This particular this was one tiny facet of the stuff that Snowden released. This particular program was called the PRISM program. Because they used the analogy of like a prism of light, right? That you have all of the different major providers of user services are like rays coming into this prism, right? And this prism then gives the one pure light, which is actually a prism works the other way. But anyway, in their analogy, it means that all of the different shades and colors of types of user data that's available, they collect in one place where they can search for anything, and collect it and keep it in perpetuity in that gigantic mirror-looking building in Utah.
I had an appointment yesterday, forgot about it, and NSA called me and reminded me too.
And in fact, this has come up a couple of times. Now that the Snowden things have been revealed, there have been cases. I think there's one case where a guy had deleted some text messages that he said in court were going to prove him innocent, and the court said, "Oh, you can't produce the text messages, and you must be guilty." And this guy had read up on the Snowden stuff, and he says, "The NSA has those text messages. They should come and produce them to prove me innocent." I don't remember how it resolved, but it's a valid question. As long as they have the real copy, should they? But anyway, so this is the real. I think, like we talked about in several of our videos so far, this is the big question of our era. Is decentralization inherently comes with a certain amount of anarchy. These things in our life that police and laws are able to control, it's only possible to control them because they're organized through central points where police and law can apply pressure.
Let's make a difference. It's not removing the law enforcement the possibility to investigate somebody.
No.
What is removing is the possibility to do mass surveillance, which is different, okay? So there are two different kinds of investigation. One thing is to say, okay, I think that one people living in this building is doing something wrong, or this group of friends, they're doing something wrong, and I'm investigating precisely that location or people. which is not gonna stop this possibility even if the system is decentralized, because I can target specifically somebody or some location. What I cannot do is that is the word bomb being mentioned by anybody in this country? Then it becomes much more complex to be done. And actually the G5 that kills the birds and do also these things, one aspect of the architecture of the G5 network, 5G, sorry.
5G.
5G.
Like G5. What is
The
that?
G5 kills birds too, but 5G does. 5G, I apologize. Is the fact that the network structure is very similar to stellar mechanics, for which
Decentralized.
is quite decentralized. Not as much as a peer-to-peer network, but close. And the interception, the detail of, for example, listening a call that happened between two people in the extreme area of the geography of the 5G will be impossible. Metadata goes up to the center because as billing will be impossible. But the listening has to be very targeted, cannot be mass surveilled. And that's why there is also antagonism between several parties from...
You would never expect that these parties who would like to surveil everything are actually percolating up some of the conspiracy theories about 5G to get the public to use the other networks because those are easier for them to collect.
This is a theory, but they probably drop a lot of that bird from an airplane in order to an export antenna. And then they do the chemtrails and all those other things, which we obviously are just joking about. But in practical terms, I mean, personally, I do for work, consulting in this sort of things, and doing mass, what is called lawful interception, or lawful monitoring, lawful because it's authorized by law.
This is true. That,
a decentralized system will make it only targeted but not mass, which
still,
I do believe.
Still, the already the law enforcement has power over. They can go and listen to the stuff that happens on your Wi-Fi network with a van outside your house, and they can figure out stuff that comes out of your router. They might have influence over the software on your computer. If they need to target a single person, they haven't lost that many tools to do that. It's just the mass collection.
Consider something. 50 years ago, there was no such thing like mass monitoring. It was even phone company were decentralized, and
there's no way to store all that data.
And also to arrive, there was no single cable that transport all the data, even if there was the chance to store. Even storing is still a problem today. That's why they filter and they only say what is important. But it was very decentralized. 50, 60 years ago, when you make a phone call outside a certain area, you need to go through an operator because physically there was no direct connection, no central point. And when they wanted to listen to somebody, they pretend to be the technician and they put a small microphone in the switch of your light that is powered, and and they listen via radio next to your house. This thing can work today perfectly as it been working 50 years ago. We mistakenly produce means for surveillance that was above the necessary.
Yes.
So already cell phone give away a lot of information, even if they are not smartphone, because they connect to tower, they leave a trace, and it's been very useful. There has been a robbery in a bank, which is a cell phone that was in front of the bank many times, because they're monitoring the place. An homicide, you can solve this investigation with a set of extra information compared to what you had years before. But when the mass of information goes to a level that is insane and is all centralized, we arrive to a point that is crazy. Exactly what Edward Snowden promotes. It's risky in every term, right? In terms of. So decentralized, peer-to-peer network that support these things are not to be considered like an anarchist method that eliminate the power from law enforcement. It just goes back 50 years to the means that they were before. Actually, not even because
their power. A little bit.
Goes back to normality, I would say. So
and I feel the same way about it, that really the constraints that existed 50 years ago helped just by virtue of the fact that this kind of massive abuse was not possible. It helped to constrain the actions of law enforcement to what's really warranted to protect people. Now, today, the constraints, the lid has been lifted. And all we're really talking about is bringing the constraints back down to a reasonable level.
Way above the reasonable level, because the tools are much easier. Being digital things, imaging. At the time of the Roman Empire, the emperor wants to spend somebody, they need to send somebody to listen, and this person has to report back. If this person has a personal interest to change the information that they heard, there was no way to record, to make them listen, or GPS locate the recording, they actually went there. The guy can hide behind the corner for 2 hours, go back, so they said they want to kill you. Just because...
and even we approached that problem once again in the time, the era of deep fake video and being able to digitally replicate an audio, and the entire question of whether digital video or audio evidence is going to hold up is about to be challenged by our ability to create realistic simulations.
Okay, so this is a good topic for the next Friday talk. Real reality and fake reality, which is not fake news, it's simply fake reality.
Deep fakes are not fake news.
It's a scary thing. You're gonna see me, when I say something wrong, I can blame it on...
and yet, when somebody makes a deep fake of someone else, it is fake.
But so...
We're going to disentangle this next time.
I think that's a good topic to discuss.
Absolutely.
Alright, so seeing that nobody sent any message, probably.
I'm sure they were too enthralled by it.
We can wave goodbye, and Monday there is the serious blockchain talks, and next Friday there are like talks like this that are more various options. Ciao ciao.
Peace.